6 o'clock, I'll call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Council Agency Authority members Beatty.
Here.
Mashburn.
Here.
Sullivan.
Here.
Vice Mayor and Vice Chair Harris.
Here.
Mayor Chair Roulette.
Here. Please stand with me for a moment of silence. Vice Mayor Harris, will you lead the pledge?
Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 3, approval of the agenda. Mr. City Manager, any changes?
No changes, Your Honor. Second.
And a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Item 4, approval of minutes.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Presentations, item 5A, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening in 5A, we have a presentation from Tim Burke, our Assistant Public Works Director, regarding the withdrawal of Bucktown Energy Storage LLC proposal.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, City Council members. Here today to do a quick presentation on the Bucktown Energy Storage Facility and the withdrawal of their option agreement. As you know, staff has been talking to an energy company, DG Power, who wanted to purchase city-owned land on Bucktown Lane, where the city had planned to put in a detention basin. They came to us and had offered to build the detention basin while also constructing their battery energy storage facility. So last week, city staff held a public informational meeting about the project. Had a good turnout from the Bucktown neighborhood. The neighborhood had many concerns with the project, including the loss of prime ag land. It didn't really fit with the character of the rural valley, and also some potential safety concerns. Then on the following day, on October 2nd, city and county staff met to discuss several hurdles of the project, of which there were many. And then finally, city staff and DG Power, the project proponent, discussed both meetings. And at the conclusion of that meeting, DG Power decided to withdraw the request for an option agreement. So DG Power is going to continue to research properties to see if the other properties would better fit for their facility. But we really just wanted to give you a quick update on where this project's at. So right now, it's the DG Power has withdrawn their option agreement. So really, the project's dead. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, sir.
If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, right here. Councilmember Vice Mayor Harris.
I would just like to say thank you so much for your quick response to the residents in that in the community, and also that the developer responded quickly as well to ensure that this project doesn't go forward in that location.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sullivan.
So similar comments. I do want to thank staff for being so responsive, and the developer also for being so responsive to the needs of the citizens out there. I do, however, think it was a pretty unique project. And so the power storage kind of concept is you take power in during the day from solar and wind when it's being produced at a lower rate. You sell it back on the grid after hours at a higher rate. But what you're doing is you're not having to use kind of non-green power sources after hours, which I really like for the environment, obviously. It was a $60 million some odd facility, so that would have produced some really good construction jobs here locally. And also, I still really haven't got a definitive answer, yes or no, on if the sales of that energy back into the grid would be taxable. The reason I bring all this up is this deal dead in Vacaville? Could we get this in city limits? Could we get it in the industrial park? Could we get that here somehow? And what do we need to do to help make that happen? Because it is good for Vacaville, it's good for jobs, it could be good for sales tax.
Right.
How do we not let this die and put it somewhere more appropriate?
The proponent is looking at other properties. They're looking at one property the city owns, and then they're also looking at the industrial park. So they are looking at it, they're evaluating it, and if anything becomes of it, then we'll come back to you and give you an update.
Okay, I don't know if there's anything we can do to be as helpful as possible. Again, it seems like it'd be a great local job creator for us, a
would.
local revenue producer possibly. I would hate to lose it. So anything we can do as a city to make them more comfortable with a more appropriate location, I would love to, go all in and push that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, sir. Moving to item 6, consent calendar. Anybody from the council would like to pull anything from the consent calendar? No, it's presentation. No? Okay, anybody from the public would like to pull any item from consent calendar?
My name is Colleen Britton, and I'm here today expressing the views and the
Ma'am.
opinion of Wendy Brecken.
Ma'am,
Pardon me?
we're gonna take any item that you would like to pull from this calendar.
Okay, you want me to list numbers?
Just list, the letters.
A through E and H.
A, B, C, D, E, and H. Anyone else like to pull anything from the consent calendar? Seeing none, I'll entertain motion for F, G, and I.
Move approval.
I got a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We'll start with 6A. What would you like to discuss on 6A, ma'am?
Okay, generally, the concerns are that there wasn't enough detailed information in the staff reports on these items, and she would like to have more details, listed in the staff report so that we can better understand the increases. For example, most of them have an increase of at least 4%, and we were concerned that that is is a normal procedure, that a contract is let, and then anything, up to a certain amount is automatically accepted without question or whatever. We just would like to know the details.
Is that for every item, ma'am?
Well, I've got more specifics for the other ones.
Okay, we'll take one item at a time.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So for 6A is actually not a city contract. It is developer-built facilities within the Vanden Meadows development. We are accepting the public improvements. They built the public improvements and we are accepting them. And so it's not really part of a contract. We didn't make any payments. It was all done by the developer. Typical for a subdivision in Vacaville or any other city.
Perfect.
So that's 6A.
I'll entertain motion for 6A.
Move approval.
All those in favor? Aye. We'll go with 6B, ma'am. Do you want to just speak on topic? Do you want to just speak on it?
It sounds
We know
it sounds
their
like she
concern.
just has a general
Right.
concern over the change orders on the
Great.
projects. We can speak to that.
Thank you.
Okay. 6B, go ahead and put up there. So you can see. So on 6B, which is the Buck Avenue sewer rehab, this project didn't have any change orders. It actually had some extension of line items. So what happened is during the bid process, we set up bid items for the contractor to bid on. They have a unit cost, and then we do field measurements on actual measurements of the facilities that they installed. Some of those items ran over. The tie-in point was a little bit longer than what was identified on the plans, and so likewise they got paid that item price, and so it raised the amount. So on this one there were no change orders, but there were item quantities that were adjusted.
Great. I'll take motion for item 6B.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we'll move to item 6C. Mr. Burke?
All right, 6C, you want to put that one up, Michelle?
While Michelle's putting that up, I'll just make a general comment. The speaker made a couple of comments, or asked a question, is there an amount, a predetermined amount set going into a contract that's acceptable to go over? And are things just automatically accepted without question? So, as you know, when we budget these projects, they're budgeted through the city council, through the CIP process. And we live within that budget. We have to live within that budget. If we don't, if we exceed the budget for any reason, whether it's unforeseen conditions during design and the scope increases, or if it's unforeseen conditions or some other reason we need to execute change orders during the construction, if that exceeds the budget, we always bring that back to you and we explain that. So I want to make that point clear. Beyond that, as long as it's within the budget, it's within my purview as the director to authorize change orders. We try to stay within 10%. That's pretty much an industry standard. Exceeding 10% of the original construction contract is industry standard. Everything that's before you tonight that Tim's going through was 4% or less. So that there's not a predetermined amount we're willing to go over, but 10% is kind of our goal that we don't want to exceed with regard to contract changes during construction. Hopefully that answered your question.
And that said, you know, if a contract doesn't need any changes, we don't write any change orders, similar to one of the previous items. You know, if it didn't need any changes, and so we, you know, didn't write any change orders. For the dog park, we had several different changes. We wrapped them up into one change order. It included installing formwork for the shade structure in a different location. We slid it down once they had the formwork was already installed. We added additional Class 2 AV and additional irrigation sleeves and repaired some other underground facilities. Amounted to $5,000.
Okay, I'll take a motion. Hold one moment. Councilmember Sullivan.
Sorry. Quick question on 4C unrelated to the cost piece. So is the park done? Is it open? Is it ready? What are the
Yes,
hours?
it is.
Is it?
It has been, and I think we had a ribbon cutting,
A month ago.
a month or so ago. So,
Awesome, thank you.
yes, it is open.
Same hours as the park.
I have a motion from Councilmember Mashburn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We'll move to item 6D. Mr. Burke?
All right. 6D is the Crocker Drive water line. I'll bring that one up. On this one, we had 3 contract change orders. Again, most of the extra work that was done was because of unmarked, unforeseen underground utilities that we had to work around. We also removed an existing asbestos-coated water line that we found once we were out there digging. And then the final contract change order was actually elimination of work, and so we got a credit. So that amounted to all those
Do you want to speak on this
change
item?
orders.
Come on up.
Any questions?
Hi, Alicia Minion. I have a question on this item under fiscal impact. It makes a statement. It says the project is funded with water capital distribution funds. So I did see that category on the development impact fee report. I think the most recent one was June 30th, 2018. And it goes on to say the staff is in the process of creating a benefit district to be considered by council at a later date, creating a mechanism for future development to reimburse the water fund for the construction of the water line. So I just wanted some clarity. The benefit district, I'm familiar with other districts like special assessment districts, community facilities districts, but benefit districts, how do they eventually generate revenue? Is it through a levy against commercial and regular property owners within a defined territory? And so I live in Southtown, and apparently my area was in a benefit district. But then when I looked at my tax bill, it looks like I'm getting assessed special assessment. So I'm wondering if this benefit district, does it ultimately mean a levy on somebody's property tax bill? And then who is getting, I'm not clear who's getting reimbursed. Is it the developer fronting the money to put in the water line, they're getting reimbursed? Or is it that the developer has already basically given the fees to the city and the city's is accessing their pot of developer impact fees that are specific for a water capital distribution project? Hopefully that makes sense.
It does. And
Okay.
and we'll answer your question, but you have a minute, 13 seconds left if you want to ask
Oh, no,
any questions.
that's my concern only on that one. And then the next,
On another item, we're just
Yes.
discussing this one item.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Would you like to answer that for us, please?
In general, a benefit district does not go on property tax rolls. So a benefit district is identified where either a developer, or in this case, the city, put in facilities that benefit beyond what that, beyond other property owners would be benefiting from. And so in this situation, all the properties within, that are undeveloped within the Interchange Business Park were required to have this looped water line system. The city put it in, and so then all those undeveloped properties will pay back their proportionate share when they pull a building permit. So when they go to develop, then they would pay their fair share of the water line. It was their responsibility to install it in the first place, but nothing was moving out there. City decided to go ahead and front the money, but then get repaid through this benefit district.
Thank you. I'll take a motion for item D, 6D.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We'll move to 6E. Mr. Burt?
6E, Fire Station 71. You go ahead and put that one up, Michelle. No problem. So on this project, we had 6 change orders that amounted to $20,000. The item description for each change order is listed there. Item 1 was a vanity countertop that we removed and replaced in the captain's bathroom that was not identified to be removed on the plans. Item 2, change order 2, was some existing. When we got into the bathroom, we found some dry rot. Item 3, there used to be some under cabinet LED lighting that wasn't shown to be replaced. So when we got in there and removed it, we had to replace it. And then item 4, existing wallpaper and additional painting in the captain's bathroom. Item 5, additional cabinets located in the common bathroom. And then item 6 was replacement and installation of new floor tiles not shown on the plans.
Perfect. So all extra work we asked to have done.
It's all extra work that we requested to be done at the time
Okay,
during construction.
thank you, sir. I'll entertain a
thing.
motion. I got a motion second. All those in favor? Aye. Move to item 6H.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This project is the final project of the big tertiary project at the Easterly plant. There were 3 previous projects, and this was called the completion project to wrap up the miscellaneous things that needed to be done. This was originally contemplated to be about a $20 million project. Once it was designed, it was estimated to be a $12 million project. Low bid came in at $9.975 million. As you can see, the total of change orders was $1.491 million. Biggest portion of that was an issue that arose after the project was designed and bid, and that was the installation of an acetic acid dosing system. That refers to our ability to nitrify and denitrify to meet our permit limits. So gives our operations staff an additional tool to meet our new permit limits from the state. So that portion was a little over $1 million. Remaining change orders was $406,000. So if you were just to look at the remaining change orders, that would equal 4.1% of the contract amount, so well within accepted standards. That I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great.
So for clarification purposes, the regulation changed midstream, and that's what required the additional change order?
Yes, and so the decision was made at the time that this was going to be the preferred method of contracting as far as timeliness of it and getting it done. So it was a negotiated change order. We got a proposal from the contractor, and the engineering group agreed with the price that was given for it.
But again, for clarification, the reason it wasn't included initially in the plan is that there wasn't a state requirement for that particular equipment until you were already in process.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You have the floor.
Hi, Alicia Minion again. So when I saw the number of change orders, and I know change orders are common, okay. But my just general question was, I'm assuming the city has policies and procedures regarding change orders, including what's defined as a change order. And in this particular case, it did indicate that there were owner requested changes, and as Diana, you're pointing out, that's a good point. There was a required change after the project went out to bid. So it would have been nice just to have more detail to address because we have different parties, the contractor and architect and the owner all making changes. It would have been nice to see who requested the party who requested the change, and then to quantify each change by party. And but anyway, I have a question. So what I was hearing from staff is it sounds like there's a percentage of wiggle room you have, discretion to go ahead and incur an extra charge or incur a change order. I heard about 10%. So what I was wondering is what's your policy when you would actually have to go to council and get approval before the work is done? Because it's my understanding all the work, all the change orders or extra costs incurred as a result of a change in the project, the work was done without having to go to council and seek approval for the additional costs. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so what I was wondering is what's the city's policy? At what point in time does staff have to come to council and actually get pre-approval prior to the work actually being performed?
Okay. You have a minute left. Is that everything you wanted?
That's it.
Okay. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Councilmember Mashburn.
Really quick, Sean, I appreciate, and Alicia, I appreciate your question. Sean, you explained that once now, right? In that when a project is let, the council approves a certain budget for that project based on
Total budget, that's
total
correct.
overall budget.
That's correct.
And in every capital project, even including those that I've been involved in at the county, the state, and all the rest of them, as long as it's within that budget, the authority lies with the project manager to make those determinations. It doesn't have to come back to the council every time or go above that project manager for that determination to be made. Every project that I've ever been involved in has some type of contingency fund for just those kind of things that we talked about, where you encounter underground piping that wasn't on the as-built plans for that project, where you encounter issues with the power source and those types of things, or the length of the run for a piece of pipe and you need to make it longer or shorter. And there are costs involved with that. And an industry standard, as he said, is somewhere on most of the project I've been on, You have one standard that's for construction that is 4%, and then you have an emergency contingency that it can be up to 5%. So somewhere between 5 and 10% contingency on almost any project of that magnitude, you know, when you're talking millions of dollars, in order to assure that the project comes in on time and on budget, because time overruns in construction, especially of that magnitude, when you have to go back and forth for an answer to whether you can proceed or not, you have all those resources just standing still. And that costs a lot of money. And that adds to the cost to the taxpayer. So having that contingency and having that authority rest with the project manager is basically an industry standard. And I'll let you take it from there, Sean, if you want to.
No, you hit it right on the head. I didn't explain the 10% very well. First of all, our goal anytime we go into construction is to finish a project with no change orders. I mean, that would be a goal. That's not a realistic goal. Okay, there's always going to be unforeseen circumstances. The owner is going to decide they want to put down this type of carpet instead of this type of carpet. There's going to be something. So our goal is 0. That's not a realistic goal. 4% is very good, especially 4% on a small contract. I mean, we're talking about $10,000. That's very good. The 10%, what I meant to say, when we budget a project, and Councilman, you hit it on the head, one of our budget items is a construction contingency, and we typically will budget 10% for that item. That's what I mean by 10%. That's not to say that if we exceed 10%, we blow the project budget, not necessarily. On the other hand, it may be 8% and we blow the project budget. If I go over the total budget that you allocated to me to construct that project, then I'm going to bring that back to you into the mid-year budget adjustment. And so the 10% is that's a budgeting goal. But like I say, it's rare that it's very rare
Mr. Cunningham,
that we get to 10%.
I don't want to speak for Mrs. Minion, but I do believe she just wants to know, do we have a policy in place, and is that policy state 10%? I believe that's what she's.
Our policy, our budgeting policy, we budget 10% contingency, construction contingency on a CIP project. That's our standard.
That's our policy.
That's our standard.
Perfect. Okay, I'll entertain motion.
Yeah, you have.
Oh, I apologize,
Well, that's fine.
Councilmember Beatty.
You just run the numbers from the top again for me. When you started, you said 20 million.
That was what the expectation was, that the
Right, but
completion
we-
project was gonna be
Well,
20
we ended
million.
up at
12
that?
and then 9.
12, right?
And then the budget for the project ended up being 12 million.
Right, so that's,
And
And,
the
and then
bid,
it bid at 9.
and the bid came in at slightly under 10.
yeah, so that's significant.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember Beatty. I'll entertain motion. I know someone made a motion. I got a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We'll move to item 7, business from the floor. This is a time set aside for, yes, you may.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Harris.
I just want to really make a comment so that people understand. Since I've been on this
Can you
council.
pull your mic?
Make a comment so that people will understand. Since I've been on this council, I can tell you that staff in all of our departments have been very, very frugal with the projects. They are accountable, they come before us, they're realistic in what they provide to us, and then they really do, I'm gonna say Sean and, even our water treatment, they stay on top of every single project. So, they're not just, it's not lip service. They really do take into account, this is the public money, and they use it wisely. And I just want to affirm our staff in that and our leadership.
Thank you. We're moving to item 7, business from the floor. This is time to address the council on any issues that are not on this agenda and are within the council's subject matter jurisdiction. I have 3 minutes here. I'll let you know when we get close, sir.
Got it on my clock, too.
Great.
Good
Go
evening,
ahead when you're
Council. I'm
ready.
Raleigh Galligan, and my comments are collaborative as I speak as a member of the Citizens Committee on the Unfunded Liability, responding to the 2018-19 Grand Jury Report entitled Survival of OPEB. Our mission, I remind you, is to influence you guys, if we could, and the staff to reduce the unfunded cost for retiree health insurance and employee pensions. We would hope that you would act like Sassoon did a couple of weeks ago in the face of debt to examine the agenda items and budget to see where costs can be feasibly contained or cuts can be made. And we hope to avoid Vallejo's debt decisions that led to its bankruptcy. Our concern is this: we haven't seen any movement on the appointment of the advisory committee suggested by the grand jury. And today you're going to be voting on a resolution to add 2 new police officers for a newly formed gang task force because of the spike in crime. Vacaville did a great job on September 17th on some proactive policing when they stopped a burglary in progress on Buck. Appreciate that. But just this last week on national TV, Vacaville's Outlets Grab and Dash issue was featured. And because of Prop 47, of the 50% that didn't get away, many were simply ticketed for a misdemeanor or release. So here's the question: will hiring more police officers change the outcome of California's catch and release? What other solutions have been explored for policing gang activities? What has been done so far
Sir,
for gang activities?
that's on the agenda tonight,
Okay,
so we can't
good.
discuss.
What are we going to cut in the coming years to afford these new hires? How can we keep adding new positions? MOUs in August, 9% PD raise, 11% firefighters raises. MOUs in October, 5% raises to staff and managers and non-safety employees. How much are we spending from our reserve account for these new hires per year? You only gave the amount for the remainder of the fiscal year. Given the other MOUs, when is the reserve policy violated? Does the cost you calculated include pension and OPEB normal and unfunded liability costs? How much Measure M money will we pay next year? I believe all Measure M money will be spent for the firefighter MOU within 2 years. Voters voted for Measure M to get new services and projects, not to pay more for the same services. Why aren't the already 2 funding mechanisms in place to fund gang suppression sufficient? Don't Measure M and I explicitly state that they would pay for gang suppression? And I'd like to invite 2 council members. We're going to meet with the Vallejo activists who were leaders in the reform movement there, and they eventually were elected to city council with that mandate, and our committee is going to meet with them, and I think 2 of you with the Brown Act could join us. So if you're interested, the first 2, let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no others, are you coming up? Okay.
I'll use less than my 3 minutes. I'm Sarah Harper, and I just wanted to express a heartfelt thank you to the City Council and to the city staff for being willing to come out and see the site of that Bucktown project, to listen to the concerns of the citizens, and to make a decision consistent with the uses in that area. So thank you very much. And inclusiveness is one of the core values of the city of Vacaville, and I think those actions really showed that value. And there are many people that would be happy to contribute in any way to creating a solution for how to assist with the detention pond. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Alicia Minion again. I had some comments on prepared for the storage facility project, and so I just have a general comment, and maybe council and staff can work on this going forward. I quite don't understand how the Bucktown project ended up on the consent calendar. So I know we've had some discussions in the past, and I think if you have a project that is even remotely controversial, that be placed on the regular calendar. The other concern I have is the project. I think one of the incentives for the city was that the developer was going to throw in the Ulatis detention basin, and so I looked into that, and it looked like the basin for Ulatis and also at Alamo Creek was really necessary. Going back and looking at staff reports, specifically in EIR, it mentioned that the city experienced extensive flooding, causing over 26 million. This is the 2005 heavy rain that we had in 2005. And there has been at least 12 flood-related disaster events in Vacaville since 1963, including 6 federal flood-related declarations since 1986. And most recently, the extensive flooding occurred within the Ulatis Creek watershed from 2 major storm events in December 2002 and December 2005. So I noted that the city had hired a consultant called West Yost, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. They actually recommended detention basins in 3 areas of Vacaville. Ulatis, it said, was proposed to have a 650-acre-foot basin. So that's substantially larger than what this developer was going to do. But what concerned me is that the consultant said the cost for Alamo, Ulatis, and another basin would be between $46 million and $69 million. So I'm just worried that we have this health, safety, welfare issue regarding the risk of flooding in that area of town. And what is the staff doing to raise the funds to build something appropriate to protect our residents in that area? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, City Council members, my name is Mike Shukin. I originally was going to speak out against the power plant being constructed. Happily, I don't have to do that this evening. I'm in the unique position that I live in the city, but we also have a small organic farm out in the county. There's just a couple comments I'd like to make on that whole process. The first one is I want to thank the community that rallied together and was able to get the information out and pass it along to the point where what we felt was an inappropriate project was indeed canceled. And also the city, both the city council and the county board of supervisors also were very respectful in responding to the community's queries when we sent emails and made phone calls. I also wanted to thank the city staff that made themselves available to answer our questions. Both Tim, Sean, the city attorney, I may not have liked what they had to say, may have been adversarial conversations, but they returned phone calls and they let the conversation go as long as it needed to, and that there's a lot to be said about that. I think the things that I'd just like to comment on is that I learned a lot about this process, and it reminded me about how unique Vacaville is. We are a strong suburban anchor with agricultural roots, and we have major metropolitan influences on either side, but we are Vacaville, and we are Solano County. Nobody ended up here. Everybody chooses to live here. And the 2 things at the informational meeting that I came away with was, first, the reason that people were so upset was they felt they were blindsided. They wanted to participate in what really was going to be a generational change for the area. And it was about 25% people from the city of Vacaville and about 75% county. So we had sort of a blend of people. Second, there was an absolute passion expressed by the people for what this land stood for, both agriculturally, environmentally, historically, economically, and spiritually. And that came out in that meeting in a way that I didn't expect and was very pleased. I'd like to close with just saying that, you know, our future as a region is tied together, the city and the county. There's a lot going on right now with whether it's the county improving the bike lanes out there to the farm to fork dinners that are in town, the developing of the downtown. But we have to remember that we are all in this together and we need to move forward together as a city and as a county. And in doing that, we'd like to have both the heritage of our area and the future respected in when making decisions. And all that we ask is that when those decisions are being made, we would really like the city to communicate with the community and the city to communicate with the county. We are all in this together. We all need to move forward together. And that's just, again, what I wanted to express.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have just one quick thing. I would like to thank the mayor and city council and especially staff for providing additional information on all those consent items. And I would suggest that in the future on consent items like that, that you also would provide that information on in the staff report that's published so that we have that to look at. It would clarify a lot of questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, I'm going to close. No, I'm not.
Mr. Mayor, council members, I'm Dale Frederick for DG Power. And since a number of people have spoken, I'd like to simply rise and thank the city for consideration of this potential project. It's been a pleasure over the past several months to work with your staff, particularly the Public Works team. Sean Cunningham and Tim Burke, at least in my view, deserve thanks and kudos for the efforts they made to craft some creative solution to the flood control risks that every resident of this city faces each season. I wish you good luck in continuing with that. And as Mr. Burke said, there may be another site that's more suitable for the energy storage facility. We can find one, that would be great. I'd enjoyed my time with the city so far and hope that we might craft a solution. After all, it is state law now, whether we all agree or not, that the grid is going to reach 100% renewable sources of electricity by 2045 and 60% by 2030, which is not too far away. So a lot of these renewable projects will have to get built somewhere. Solar, wind, other types of renewable energy sources, and since, as we know, the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time or predictably, a necessary part of our future electric grid will include storage plants like we're proposing. And we'd love to do one here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no other comments, I'm going to close the floor. We'll move to item 8, public hearings. I see none. 9A, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 9A this evening is a resolution approving the memorandum of understanding agreement between the City of Vacaville and the VCA, Vacaville City Employees Association, and Administrative Managers Group. We have administrative service staff here to present.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We're presenting the agreements between VCA and AMG tonight. VCA is our Vacaville City Employees Association, made up of about a little over 100 line level staff, including clerical and technical. Administrative Managers Group is about 20 unrepresented confidential employees. Our goals throughout this process have been to maintain sustainability in our future unfunded liabilities. That includes pension and OPEB costs, while keeping in mind that we need to still recruit and retain valued employees, good employees from the outside, and retain those employees that we already have. The term is 2-year term, November 1st, 2019 through October 31st, 2021. Wage increases include a 2% COLA effective October 1 of 2019. It's of note that the Bay Area CPI is currently 3.5 and the overall California is just above 3%. We also utilize studies in our market area to determine what wage increases should be had across our groups. There's also a 1% city contribution to the employee deferred comp account. This is a 457 deferred compensation account. And this account is not a pensionable contribution from the city, so there's no pension costs to unfunded future liability with this increase. There's also a 2% COLA effective next October of 2020. Other changes in the contract include an increase in tuition reimbursement from the current $1,500 to $2,000 per fiscal year. If the employee chooses to utilize it, we've also added an option for current student loan debt repayment. Also looking at recruitment and retention, what we found from other agencies, from our current employees, surveying our current employees as well as those employees that exit from the city, we found that something that we don't have is a 980 schedule that a lot of other agencies do. And a lot of our current employees and employees that have left here have expressed the desire for that. The cost over the term is $646,680 to the general fund, with a total of $954,624 total. Again, this is 2 years, the cost over 2 years, 2 groups, and about 120 employees. So our recommendation is by simple motion to adopt the subject resolution. and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
I see no questions, but I did want to thank you for the presentation. Typically, this would be a consent item, and we've decided as a council to pull it and make sure that it's on the business, from the business items. So I do appreciate it, and we're trying to do our best to be transparent out there. So, Councilmember Sullivan.
I wanted to echo that. I think we just discussed actually having these items pull off the consent calendar and actually have a little more detail and time in the sun, and the presentation was great. So I'm having a little trouble, I guess, in general with the process. So it's not necessarily these contracts. They make sense to me. They're in line with what we've done so far. I guess where I'm getting some anxiety and what I'm hoping for maybe from the rest of council and staff is, so trying to dance a fine line between talking about kind of how the closed session piece works and how we come up in here and decide, and then how I'm having some consternation. So what'll happen is we'll make kind of a general kind of discussion in closed session. Folks will go off and kind of do their thing, and then the next meeting, all of a sudden, we have a contract to approve. So the problem I have, though, is when looking at the financial data, the 5-year forecasts that we get are very, very important to me. And so I got the 5-year forecast for these 2 contracts yesterday. And so again, I don't have the opportunity to ask questions. I can't dig in with staff. Things have changed dramatically since the last forecast I received. So I guess and I got a lot of flack from the fire contract for this exact same issue. There's a lot of things I want to ask about, and I feel like once I'm up on the dais and I have these big questions about when do we trigger the reserve, why did the forecast change dramatically? In some cases they go up, in some cases they go down. I don't have the ability to answer those questions. So when I was on school board before, what would happen is the school board would make a proposal, they'd go to the bargaining table. That wouldn't come back the next meeting. It would come back to council again. We talk about all the financials, the insides and outs, the reserve, the this, that, all the numbers, and then the contract would go to be approved. We're skipping that step. So whenever these contracts come up, I have 2 different forecasts here, and it shows we've breached the reserve policy in 2 different years. So I don't feel comfortable or educated enough on the finances to approve contracts without that discussion first. And I know that hasn't been past practice, but that makes me really uncomfortable. So because these 2 contracts are pretty similar to what we've done before, I think I'll move forward with them tonight. But I do have a lot of questions that I don't get answered with this process. So I think it's the process that I'm having problems with. It's not actually the contracts or something else. I'm wondering if maybe we can do things differently going forward, or at least maybe I can work with you guys differently, because again, when the 5 years change dramatically this is a 2-month 5-year, dramatic changes, and I have lots of questions, big picture stuff. I'm not sure where to go. So I think that's all I wanted to talk about. But again, it just feels really uncomfortable having a general discussion on where we go next, and all of a sudden, boom, contract, and the contract's worth $4 million, and we're up here to approve it. I need a little more meat and potatoes, if that makes sense.
I see no other comments from the council. I'll open up the floor for any comments.
Hi, Alicia Minion again. I have, first I want to thank staff for placing this item on the regular calendar. And so, but I have some questions, and I think maybe it has a lot to do with process, and I'm not familiar with your process on approving or first designing, developing the MOU, and then getting it approved. So when you look at the staff report, the first sentence, it says, it mentions the MOU and agreements. So it sounds like 2 different things. So I don't know if the agreements are side letters. And it says that the MOU and the agreements expire October 31st, 2019. Then you go to the resolution for today that you're considering today, and it says resolution of the City Council of the City of Vacaville approving memorandum of understanding / agreement. So it's only singular. And then I don't see the MOU or the agreements. I don't see them in the staff report. I don't know if they haven't been written yet, but what I saw instead was Exhibit A, which was a list of terms that looks like maybe those were the things that changed. And the first item under wages, it says 2% COLA effective October 1st, 2019. So first I thought, oh, this is a retroactive wage increase. But if you go to the first page of the staff report, it says the MOU and the agreements expire October 31st. So it appears that you're approving a term that overlaps a pre-existing MOU. Does that make sense? You guys following me? Hopefully you're following me. So is that a typo?
Ho- ho- We'll just wait for you.
Okay, so I still have more. And then, so one of the concerns is because we only see the terms that are changing, it's, how do you know, I mean, they seem kind of ambiguous to me. How do you know that they're gonna be translated properly onto the MOU? I mean, do you guys ever approve the MOU? I don't know if you ever see it and approve its final version. Okay, hold on, I've written my notes. I'm still looking at my notes. Okay, I have a question on one of the benefits. The 1% city contribution to an individual deferred compensation account, is that something that's new? That sounds like a 401k, 401a, 403b, 457. So I'm curious, so what's the total matching now? So that's another my question. And back to what Nolan was saying, I don't see how this impacts the 5-year forecast, your budget forecast. So I see the 2 years, but I don't know how that fits into your forecast. And are you gonna be updating the budget online to reflect these new terms?
Can I have you wrap it up? Your 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'm trying, I'm jumping all over the place. Oh, and then it also says you're going on a 980 schedule, and are you closing every other Friday? City Hall, is it closing? Every other Friday? Okay, so,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Staff, would you like to? Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, that was a lot, so let me try.
Sure.
And I apologize, I have a cold, so I'll do my best. So from a process standpoint, I've been with the city since 2006, and I can only tell you what we have done in that entire time. And a lot of it also is things that were followed as a process prior to me getting here. So in terms of what you might call the Vacaville way, this is how we've done things. And so typically what happens is we get our direction from the council in terms of our budget or specific items that you might want us to be meeting and conferring on with the bargaining units, and we get that direction in closed session. So that's where we have the conversations with the council, and staff is typically myself, and you see Jessica and Ken here right now, we're the team. And so as the chief negotiator, I will go in and get kind of the direction from the council. Where would you like us to go? Kind of talk about financials. So we do talk about financials. We do talk about the forecast. We do break down costs. And then the process kind of unfolds, and each process is never the same because each bargaining unit, we are formally negotiating with them. And so depending upon what either you've directed me to negotiate, and depending upon what it is they're asking for, this process just is a back and forth, if you will. And so my authority, it really resides with you. And so whatever direction I get from the council, that's exactly what we go forward with. Nothing more than that. We, along the way, will cost out proposals. So as an example, a bargaining unit may ask for a particular item. We will cost that out. We will bring it to you. And it does sort of go back and forth. So, and sometimes the process can take a bit longer. And so that can get kind of hard because it goes on for a while, and maybe we talked about something that was discussed, a few months ago, and now here we are 4 or 5 months down the road. And so typically what happens is as we go forward, we back and forth, we come into closed session, we update the council, and then kind of to your comment, Councilmember Sullivan, about you give me the authority and then all of a sudden you see that we have an MOU. It's because I'm following the authority and the direction that I'm receiving from the council. If I didn't have the authority or I couldn't reach agreement with that authority, I would be coming back to council. And so as a process though, it's always been that way where whatever the authority is I receive from the council, if I can reach an agreement with the bargaining unit with that authority, then I will do so. We'll work up the MOU and agreement, and then we'll bring it to you in formal setting.
if the council would like to change that process, meaning if you give me a particular authority and you want me to come back as a final check-in, say, hey, I got a deal, here's what it looks like, we could certainly do that. But along the way, we do cost everything out and share that with the council. And it can be a lot because there's a lot of information, a lot of back and forth. So that's really how the process goes. I don't know if I've answered all your questions on that.
Yeah.
And then what happens is when we do finally reach agreement, excuse me, and then we come to council, we put an item on the agenda, and as mentioned before, we used to put them on consent. It had been that way before I came here and stayed that way until now. We put them on the agenda item, and then we bring it for your approval. And everything we bring to you is not MOU language and not the verbatim MOU. We're bringing to you kind of the term, if you will, and the costs associated with the fiscal impact. The process here has been that once we get the, well, let me back up, I apologize. Once we have agreement, the union has to ratify, okay? So they'll ratify and approve their agreement, then we come to you in formal setting. And then once you approve that, then we work on all the details of the MOU. And that's staff. We work with the union and staff. So that's how it's always been done. We've never completed an actual MOU and then brought that to you for final approval, because what we're doing is implementing the terms of what you've already authorized. So that's how that works. And then there was a question about an MOU versus an agreement. And an MOU, in this staff report here, the MOU is really for VCA, and they're a formal bargaining unit, whereas AMG, they're unrepresented. So they have an agreement versus an MOU, so that's the difference. I'm sorry. And the comment about the October 1 date versus November 1, as part of the agreement for this particular MOU, the agreement was if we were able to reach agreement on a total package, we would go ahead and implement that 2% COLA effective October 1 instead of November 1, so that's the difference there. The actual current MOU does expire October 31, but we are going to be implementing the COLA October 1, so. The 1% deferred comp, we have a deferred compensation program. We have a 457 program, so that's a program that we have had in place. We've had that in place for a long time. It's been in place for management. It's now going to be new for our VCA group. And so that's just a program that we have had in place, and it's 1% of your base salary. And as Jessica mentioned, there's no pension paid on that. And there's no match required for this particular item. Oh, and then for AMG, it will be a total, they have had deferred compensation, and so for them, they'll be at 6%. Again, comment on the forecast, the costing, the impact of all of that. Again, in closed session, we go back and forth. We bring you breakdown on cost of each particular item. You know, we tally it up, we give you a total. We also, from time to time, will also bring you a forecast in closed session. We do a forecast as a modeling tool to kind of, truly as a forecast, to try to figure out where are we now, where do we think we're going. We use that in the budgetary process, which you see and you adopt in the formal budgetary process. We'll bring forward, we're going to do a mid-year update here soon. We bring that to you. And so there are a variety of opportunities for you to see that forecast, as well as closed session when we come to you. So I'm not sure if I answered.
I didn't mean
Council,
to be
council members.
Didn't mean to be abrasive or direct. It wasn't my intention at all. But I do think, to some extent, though, it is still a little hurried. And so the problem I'm having is the reserve policies jumping around, for me, forecast to forecast. And I have questions as to why. So it actually just, based on the forecast that I'm seeing, it's moving, and I can't tell why it's moving. There's also pretty significant swings in revenues and expenses over the 4-year period of time that I'm looking at. And that always changes. It's a forecast. I get that. I guess for me, before I approve a $4 million expenditure or a 11 million or whatever, I just want to know kind of the big picture landscape and why these items are moving. And again, the way it's happened the last couple of contracts, I haven't got the opportunity to get those questions answered before the fact because that just hasn't worked out that way. So I guess for me, that's what I'm asking for a little more. It's just one more step in the process. Whether or not the rest of the council agrees with me, I don't know. But again, it has swung significantly in the last two bits, and that's why I felt so uncomfortable with the fire contract, and that's why even tonight I still have some big questions about how the numbers moved in just 2 months significantly. So for me, based on my past experience, based on my experience in the county, it feels a little rushed, and I'm looking for more detail. So I didn't mean to be abrasive or harsh. That's just kind of what I'm needing to feel comfortable.
Vice Mayor Harris?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say that it is absolutely true what you've just stated to the public, and that is we go over each of the proposals, and there is a negotiation back and forth. We do get those costs, right? We do get those. But I think probably, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to speak for you, but for Councilman Sullivan, and what's happening is that everything doesn't happen at once.
Right.
So we're negotiating on an ongoing basis with many bargaining groups, which means those forecasts are gonna change pretty dramatically based on all those negotiations. The bottom line is, we can only do what we can do in terms of forecast. Property tax may change, sales tax may change, development agreements may change. I mean, there's a number of things that actually affect that forecast. What we do is we make the best educated decision on the information at hand. But as we go along, there's oftentimes we need to make adjustments to the decisions that we've made. We need to, and I can foresee in the future, if our economy does take a bit of a dive, we're gonna have to make some pretty tough decisions on what we cut, because there will have to be cuts. That's the bottom line. But our people are a most important asset for the city, so we really do need to ensure that we have that recruitment and retention, and that we can keep our valued employees. So it is a balance.
Thank you. Next speaker?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Paul Troxel. I've lived here for 32 years. After listening to this tonight, I thought maybe there's another avenue. Getting a constant pay raise every year and a cost of living increase is a wonderful way to live, maybe in government. But in the real world, that's not how it works. I just recently retired, and I wanted to tell you about a program that I think could be beneficial to the city and to the employees in the city. It's called Pay for Performance. Instead of just giving somebody arbitrarily a pay increase because they've been here 10 years or whatever, pay them for performance. If the chief of police or the chief of the fire department comes up with an idea that saves the city $2 million, pay him. Give him a bonus. He deserves it. If one of their peace officers or the firefighters comes up with an idea that saves $100,000, pay him. Give him 5%. You'll see cream rise to the top. You'll see the really active minds, the smart ones, start making a little more money. It incentivizes the ones that are just kind of coasting along because I got this great job with the city. And this includes the city sewer workers, the city waterworks, everybody in the city. I mean, when we have one department in the city that has 4 employees that account for almost $1.2 million a year in benefits and pay, we're gonna just add a percentage and say, good to go. How about some of those people coming up with ideas that say, hey, we can save you guys $20 million and pay them. Give them 5% of that $20 million. I don't care. CEOs get paid this way. For 35 years, I got paid this way. It was base salary plus commission. So if you want to, I would suggest that if you really want to see the brilliant people in this city rise to the top, from the lowest paid employee all the way to the highest paid employee in the city, and I care not what they make, Let them use their ideas and bring them and save us money and show us better ways to do things, and then pay them for it, instead of just arbitrarily saying 5% for you, 11% for you. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. The checkbook's gonna run out of money. We're already in a terrible situation financially, and times are already tough, Vice Mayor. They may get worse. And I very much appreciate everything that every single employee in this city does. The EMTs saved my life one night, they saved my wife's life another night, and I'm grateful as it can be. But damn it, just handing out the money's gotta stop someplace. Thank you, I appreciate your time.
Seeing no other comments, I'll bring it back to council, entertain motion. Oh, I have a comment from Councilmember Beatty. I don't hear it, so I apologize. I usually hear the clicky.
I think sometimes sometimes it's just semantics. But it is my understanding that we do have a pay-for-performance model in the city. We pay everyone because they perform and do well. And the ones that don't do well, I know we have a policy in place. We help them find other work someplace else. They're released to their future someplace else. So it may be semantics at some level, but we do have a pay-for-performance model in place, and the people who work get paid for their performance, graded on their performance, and released on lack of performance. I understand that. So in some ways, it's the same math. I mean, if you're going to give the smart ones more money by percentages, then we've decided we found a way to do that as well by percentages, providing people cost of living increases so they continue to focus on their jobs and rear their families and do the things that need to be done. So at some levels, it's just a different understanding. We pay employees for the city to perform, and they do. So we appreciate them for that.
Thank you for your comments. Do you want to make a motion?
Yes, I would like to make a
Move
motion that
approval.
we move approval.
Okay. Second, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We'll move to item 9B, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 9B this evening is a resolution of City Council of the City of Vacaville establishing a gang task force, approving a budget augmentation to fund 1 new sergeant, 1 new police officer. Chief Carley is here for a presentation.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council. I'm not sure if the public is with us tonight, but for those
They
that
definitely
that
are.
are in the audience, are they?
Yes.
All right. Before you tonight is a proposal and to establish a gang task force within the city of Vacaville and the police department. I see that I now have the controls. We'll see where we go with this. Before I get started, I think it's important for you and the audience to understand that we operate, usually every decision we make strategically is under the direction of what our mission is or our focus. Item number 2 in our 4-item focus specifically addresses the importance of violent behavior, and we see a lot of that in gangs, gang activity, street crimes, and the behaviors that if they go uncontrolled or unchecked will wreak a level of havoc that is really hard to recover from. I've been in the city of Vacaville for 30 years, and I've seen times where gang activity has risen and it has fallen. And some of those may go back to when there was an early adoption in the early 1990s, when many people would see that there was a tough-on-crime approach to 3 strikes you're out, or many other initiatives within the formalized prison system. And that is why we're in front of you today, is to give a little history so that we understand why things are different today, because the why is probably the most important aspect of this presentation. Assembly Bill 109 was really a realignment, and I know Councilman Mashburn, you're probably very familiar with this one. To the unsuspecting public, you may not understand that there was a mandate to reduce prison population. And this was battled in the courts, and then eventually it was determined legislatively to create a mechanism to reduce the prison population. Now the reduction of 35,000 inmates to lower levels of incarceration also resulted in a near immediate release of approximately 13,000 that went into the local population that would just be back onto the streets, into the communities within the state. Although some of them would have been on post-release community supervision, the reality is they did not serve their sentence, and there was an identification of approximately 500 known criminal offenses that would be considered incarceration in the prison system, whether it's non-serious, non-violent, non-sexual. And that was the compromise that made everyone feel like this was going to be a good idea. The reality is it released 35,000 inmates in those particular categories that we now have to deal with in one form or another. In addition to that, one that is probably more popular in more recent years is Proposition 487. And in this particular
Chief,
one,
Chief,
yes.
I know you have the whole presentation, so I think
Yes.
I'd like to jump in while we were talking about AB.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So the other issue, and it hits home, I believe, is so when they're going through court, they've been arrested for these offenses. They plead their offenses down, so it could have been violent. They bring it down to nonviolent to get them into the jail system, and then AB 109 released them, even though they had a violent crime. It just showed that they plead down. So those people that maybe had a violent crime are being released because when they plead down, and then they were released through 109, even though they possibly did a violent crime. Correct?
That's absolutely correct. And a simple rap sheet for most criminal offenses is a listing that shows an arrest and a process through prosecution and adjudication. And that is really a very simplified way of looking at some of these offenses. And in my history, it's really appalling to see what it takes to actually get to prison today. And then those were actually reduced even more. So violent offenses were usually something that is whatever a plea deal is, so that it can be adjudicated more expeditiously. But you're absolutely correct.
I have one more comment.
Yes.
Councilmember Mashman. Oh, I'm sorry. He's going to wait. Proceed.
Okay.
Thank you.
So with Proposition 47, it's very deceptive because the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act was really designed for a social justice reform to look at recidivism and ways that we can improve the incarceration in society for rehabilitation. Very commendable in its design. The challenge is when you really begin to look at what it did, is it reclassified certain laws from felony to misdemeanor. Effectively, it's the decriminalization of the offenses. So when we look at what is a crime and then you begin to reduce it, the easiest way to describe one example is a theft. People think of petty theft, but organized crime and organized retail theft used to be 400. It was elevated to nearly 1,000. This type of behavior allowed for, when this went into effect, for nearly 200,000 petitions to reclassify their felony offense to a misdemeanor offense. So even further reducing what would have been a felony to a misdemeanor, or even in some cases an infraction. So the behavior isn't changing, it's just the way we view whether or not we're going to accept the behavior within our society. Now the challenge with that is, even here in Solano County, that represented nearly 3,000 petitions. And so that is just from a local sense what begins to occur in the impact of the shifting of what is an attempt for social reform actually has an unintended consequence for those that would look for ways to bypass the system because it's too lucrative, and they're not changing their behavior. So this decriminalization effect is something that we're beginning to see more and more, and while we might discuss what I did hear a comment before as far as retail theft, the emboldened acts are what is more obvious today. I'll give you one statistic. It is somewhere around 68%, 70% increase since Proposition 47 in multiple suspect retail theft. That is an indicator that it is not just a simple theft, petty theft in the store. It's organized crime. It's because the system is being worked by those that feel that there's no consequences. This is probably the most concerning one for me in my profession, and it's unknown to most of the public. In the CDCR system, there was a lawsuit in the somewhere around 2011, and it was the inmates that were housed in a secure housing unit. It's known as the SHU. It's the very violent and very dangerous. It is near solitary confinement. They don't have contact. And many of them that were in there were there because of violent offenses. Much of their behavior surrounding gang activity, and gun violence on the street. The trouble with this particular Ninth Circuit ruling that was Asker against Brown, the state of California, was the settlement that occurred in 2015 all but disbanded the SHU. It didn't close entirely, but 94% of all the inmates that were in that solitary confinement were released into the lower general population of prisons, such as Vacaville. Vacaville is not unique and it may not have a direct tie, but level 2 and level 3 prisons allow for a somewhat moderate level of risk, but it's not this high risk or serious offenders. Now what you're doing with the gang members that were locked up, and this represents 1,500 inmates that are brought back into the general population throughout the state. The generals and lieutenants of the gangs were now able to reconstitute their networks because they are housed in the criminal system by gangs. That is how they're housed. So they instantly are now reorganized with their generals because of a lawsuit. Now what that means between 2015 and 2018 is a strong resurgence of their organization and activity between inside the prison and out on the street, because the gangs are actually run in the prison. What does that mean for Vacaville and any other jurisdiction? Because we're not alone in this. It means that the activity out on the street is more organized today than it's been since I remember being an officer on the street in the early 90s. 1991, 92, 93, it was very aggressive. We saw a lot of gang activity. So we've had a handle on it for a long time, and so some would ask, what is the question here and why is it different? It's because of a lot of legislation that's out of my control and it's out of your control. But I think it's important we know why that this is important right now. The gun violence in Vacaville, while we've seen a lot of activity in the region in Solano County, we're not immune to it. There are no borders. The gang activity at a young age is, for some reason, there's a sense of belonging. There's an identification with a family-like environment, and it's hard to describe unless you work in the system and you're around them. But what we've seen even in Vacaville, even since the late spring and summer, is 2 homicides that we do know that are gang-related. One would only be constituted our jurisdiction because the other was CHP. But make no mistake, both of them have connections to Solano County and to individuals in our community. That doesn't make us any more dangerous than anywhere else, and our goal is to ensure the public safety. But we do have to take note, and that's why I'm before you tonight, asking for the creation of a gang task force that will start as soon as we possibly can, but move forward so that we can address this behavior that I don't see changing because of this activity. Now, I can't change what the laws are, but our behavior as far as our police response is, we don't necessarily arrest people because we think that they're going to be locked up forever. But what we can do is do everything we possibly can to ensure the safety by addressing them each and every day when we come across them. It's just that we can't do it simply based upon calls for service and the officers that are on the street. It requires an investigative body that can create intel and really work towards a successful understanding of what is going on from neighborhood to neighborhood, region to region.
I have a comment.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Harris.
Thank you. So just a quick question. We used to have a gang task force, is that correct?
We used to have a team in the department called originally 20 years ago, it was a street enforcement team. And it evolved as far as what the mission was into a crime suppression team. Solano County has one. Fairfield has always had some type of a team that was focusing on street crimes. And we lost some of that during the recession. And so in the recovery of the recession, there was a mission that specifically was addressing crime suppression. It wasn't solely targeting the behavior of gangs or the illegal possession or use of firearms or violent behavior, but it was focusing significantly on probation, parole, knowing that a lot of the recidivism was caused by individuals that were not complying with their terms of probation or parole. So we had a similar team like that, and part of the recession created cuts that in some respects didn't fully recover. I will tell you that part of the mission for addressing gangs up to now was housed within the community response unit. But the reality is the community response unit focuses on a daytime set of hours, primarily on quality of life, addressing homeless issues, working with businesses for the economic vitality of what is in the best interest of our community. And then all the behaviors that I'm describing tonight with 4 people working morning hours. The mission for a gang task force is always an afternoon, evening operation. It's very, very dangerous. It's work that it requires very skilled individuals who understand what's going on the street and the implications of gang activity and gang behavior. So
Okay.
part of this is it's very much similar to that, but very specific to the gangs and the illegal gun issues. But to your point, we used to have this, but
So
that was
I
something
just
that didn't.
recall them going into the schools and actually educating parents and educating students.
Yes.
I was in one of those meetings and it was really very eye-opening and very informative. But I guess, you know, we've added other police officers along the way since the recession, right? Recently, we've added police officers, and so maybe at the point in time, we lost that ability to have that crime suppression / gang task force. You know, with the addition of new officers already, did that sort of help out enough to maybe reallocate some folks, or are we just not, there's just too much crime happening and too much legislation that's affecting our ability to stay on top of it? I guess that's my question.
Well, in a perfect world, if none of these elements that I've shared were in front of us today, things may be very different. The reality is the city is growing, and even with our growth, trying to maintain the level of services that we all have enjoyed for many years, as we add new neighborhoods and businesses and we do grow, the impacts of that, especially along the I-80 corridor, continue to create challenges that we're trying to stay ahead of. And the recovery, while very welcomed with the addition of officers in the last several years, really was a recovery and not necessarily forward-looking. This is one of those areas where you might consider it is also part of a recovery, but it really is also trying to be forward-looking. There's no doubt that I think it's important to note, and for the public, we have been as fiscally responsible as we possibly can. I can't control all the numbers, but what I can do is I can address the resources as best I can. And it's important to note that if you authorized the 2 additional officers tonight, it still puts us at less officers than we had 10 years ago. And I think that's important. So we have retooled and we have restructured and we have become efficient as best we possibly can to provide what I believe is some of the best services. But in a moment like this, I can also tell you that the ask is a supervisor, and it is one officer who would be a detective. In the meantime, I've asked staff, what can we do with what we have existing? And so part of this also is eliminating some of what would have been where we wanted to go with some of our other programs and retooling. So my intent with this is not to start a unit with 2 people. It is to utilize resources that have been part of the recovery and add in addition to these 2. This is a unit that requires no less than a supervisor and 4 officers for what they do each and every day. But what I've done is I've looked at as best I can to be effective with and responsible with the finances to say, I can do this, but it's going to require these 2.
Thank you.
No other questions?
Just I think it's important to know that 50% of the guns that we've taken off the street in the last 90 days are from individuals that are from Vacaville, but it comes from all the way up near the Sacramento region all the way to the Bay Area. So it's all over the place. We're on the corridor, and there's a brazen level of behavior that isn't just Vacaville, and we're seeing it all over. This is an example of the things we're seeing very dangerous. And in the hands of the wrong people, it's not something that we want to see driving around in Vacaville. The analysis that we know of as far as the gangs are, we know based upon the recent review of the data is nearly 200 gang members that are certified or associates within Vacaville. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when you look at what's going on in Fairfield, in Solano County. What's inside Solano County Jail is very significant. We know that there's a lot of individuals who are on probation and parole, and so part of the focus would also be to look at them, because part of the behavior is gang activity, and part of it is this decriminalization that's going on here in Vacaville and in the region. Very common. We have tried to prosecute some cases, whether it's state or federal, based upon where we think we're going to get the most effective sentence to eliminate what is this revolving door that was a comment during business from the floor. It's true. We try to do that and evaluate each and every case so that if we can effectively eliminate that, we will. But it is a revolving door that I can't control. The task force itself, I believe that also has to be educational. To your point, Vice Mayor, is the need to make sure that we can reach the kids so that they don't feel the need to be drawn into this. Part of a strategy is also utilizing our clinical services staff and our families to try and remove that, and so to be able to bridge that even within a task force environment, and also to work closely within the region, the experts that are in the state prison system and also Solano County, so that we truly know who these people are, where they're coming from, and effectively do what we can to interrupt this enterprise that it's a danger to the community. The fiscal impact, in front of you, you can see this, and I did make a note that there's a difference in the ongoing costs and the upfront costs. The $232,690 is for the one police officer and one police sergeant for the remainder 8 months of the year, beginning in November. The goal would be to begin working on it immediately, but becoming effective and trying to establish it for at least as soon as we can possibly get this operational. The remaining budget that's there is equipping the vehicles, the computers, the equipment, everything that it takes. And so there's a long list of items for safety equipment, vests, uniforms, everything that goes with establishing those two new positions. The existing positions that I intend to use are already equipped, so there's no additional cost to that. And then the total cost for this fiscal year is $420,650 to be funded through general fund reserves and not the general fund, because it is an issue of, obviously, that's of a concern for you as a council. It does require a budget augmentation. However, the future years for this cost ongoing, so that we could have a fully functioning gang task force that can address all this, is noted below an annual cost in the next year of $375,969. And that's everything because of the ongoing costs that have already been incurred to establish it. That's my presentation. The recommendation is to adopt this by simple motion and allow me to start this gang task force. And I'll be happy to take any questions if you have them.
Chief, I truly appreciate everything you do and your department. I appreciate the presentation tonight. I would actually like to address my question to Mr. City Manager. We do collect CFDs, and they are directly paid from the residents for public safety. Moving forward, are CFDs going to pay for some of these things that we're implementing if we implement it tonight?
Yes, the current CFD allocation for budget this year actually was used to fulfill an additional officer and an increase to a lieutenant in a position related to some items. But moving forward, as CFDs increase, those funds could be used to offset these positions.
Perfect. Vice Mayor Harris.
I want to say thank you very much for your presentation, and I know it's a challenge to stay on top of the activity that's actually invading Vacaville. But I also want to say that I'm going to support this, but I think it's really incumbent upon our community to continue to really look at their neighborhoods and to ensure if they see something, say something. I mean, we're pretty good in Vacaville about reporting things, But I think if we really want to keep things under control, it's going to take the community stepping up. And if they see something that looks like it's not appropriate, then they need to make a phone call so that the police can respond in a timely manner. I just want to stress that because, you know, we do have officers that work hard day and night, and any help that we can provide as a community is always important.
Before I go to another council member, I wanted to go back to you, Mr. City Manager. We talked about CFDs, but I failed to mention that CFD money from all the residents that are coming in and purchasing homes and pumping money into this account for police officers and fire and safety, it all goes right into the general fund. So the general fund money is actually paying for part of CDF money. So, okay, thank you. Councilmember Beatty?
Yeah, I won't be able to provide any additional insight based on your 30 years of law enforcement. I do know, though, I mentioned last council meeting that I've gone through the records the last couple of years, and there's been an uptick in violent crime. Again, I made reference to the fact that it's a public document. You can take a look at it. Sexual assault and rape has doubled since last year. And I started noticing these things a couple years ago. So about 3 years ago, I decided with Prop 47 and with AB 109, because I live here, I've got to do something. I don't know how to be a police officer, so I think I'll go to the prisons and see if I can catch these guys coming out of their prison and try to teach them how to reintegrate so we don't have these same sort of problems. So I've been California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, that's CDCR, they have what are called RAC courses, Rehabilitation Achievement Credits. These RAC courses, if you get them approved through the state of California, which I have 3 courses that are approved through the state of California, help them with their finances, help them with their substance abuse. We have a restorative justice course that we teach. I help them understand the impacts of what they have done. I'm also a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee for both the prisons. So I'm actually in both the prisons at least 4 times a week, every week, trying to catch these guys because they're getting out. That's the math that I figured out 2 or 3 years ago that maybe perhaps citizens are finding out tonight. Guys who are not supposed to be getting out are getting out without the tools, support system, and even sometimes, public assistance to put them in a position where they can be successful. So I have watched for 3 years men walk out of both these prisons that are not prepared to be in your neighborhood. I've also watched very carefully for the last 3 years people not leave Vacaville. There was a period of time where they get on a bus, they go to parts unknown, but again, I'm there 4 days a week. I'm seeing where they're being paroled to. They're staying. So this process of 109 to 47, it's not about more police officers because we're a new approach to crime. We're going to focus on gangs, and it's not that. It's someone else changed the rules. And if we don't change the way we respond to the rules that got changed on us, I'm telling you, I'm seeing it every week. You're going to have neighbors that you do not know how to manage. So if I'm understanding this process correctly, part of their responsibility would be go and greet these individuals who are living in the community and moving into our neighborhoods, as opposed to waiting for them to do something. Actually, maybe make a visit, let them know that we know where you live, and we want to encourage you to stay on the path, and that's a part of what will be taking place.
That
right?
is part of it, yes.
Okay, so anyway.
Kind way of saying a welcoming committee.
Yeah, yes, I'd love to see welcome committee, because again, I'm there 4 days a week, and the bulk of who I see being released and staying in our communities have not quite finished the process they need to finish in order to move next to you or anyone on council or anyone in our neighborhoods.
Sir, can you kill your mic? I believe Councilmember Sullivan is next.
So a couple quick questions. So this question is probably more of a Jeremy question, I guess. So with the normal budget process, and when we're adding positions to a fiscal year, kind of after the budget's been approved and we've started, what is the normal kind of mid-year position addition process? And the reason I say that is because crew has way more to do than they already can do, and I totally understand the need for these positions. The concern I have, though, is we could probably go through every department, and every department's going to have these vital needs. I guarantee Sean could use more people, and I guarantee Chief could use more people. And so what is the normal, because I've only been here for 7 or 8 months so far, what is the normal protocol? And the reason I ask is because big picture-wise, depending on what forecast you look at, we just tipped into structural deficit. So as much as I want to add these folks, that also is 450,000 that we're adding to a structural deficit that at some point in time we have to look at. So is there a bigger picture way to look at this, or is it kind of one-off like this traditionally?
Traditionally, we would look at this at a mid-year in terms of any capacity. What's unique in this issue, that this is an issue in response to what we've seen a spike in the last 90 days. So it's really about addressing an issue we see key to public safety. So taking the time to go through the process doesn't help resolve the issue we're seeing. With the number of guns we've seen taken off the street in the last 90 days, with the amount of violent crime we've seen, with the sheer amount of people and something that John's done a great job explaining to a lot of the staff, some of these so-called nonviolent groups we see, the 3 ladies that show up and knock off Tommy Hilfiger and just run in and grab a bunch of stuff, that's the story you see on the news. What you don't see is when our folks pull them over and there's 3 guns and cash. They're not nonviolent. That one particular act is nonviolent. So in this is the case is the response needed to be ahead of the process. And you're correct. We will be looking at the budget process because we're going to have to make up. This is coming out of fund reserves.
Right.
So we'll have to look in future budget cycles to be controlling costs to make sure we're addressing our fund reserve policy.
Right. Okay.
In this case, it was the issue of public safety, and the spike we saw was so dramatic, we didn't want to wait in the process, and we want to get ahead of this.
Okay.
So these folks have an approach, and we're tied into these issues because a lot of it's at the intelligence side. It's getting plugged into the system so our folks can identify the issue.
Okay.
Because sometimes just identifying the issue and reaching out to those people can help prevent a scenario. So that's why it's really just a resource-driven in reaction to a spike we've seen that we need to get ahead of.
Okay, thank you. And Chief, the second question is a great presentation. I really appreciate it. And I after spending some time with your staff, I totally understand the need. And the crime suppression team absolutely is something that came up a bunch of times throughout the tour, and I think it's sort of vital. There is a natural level of skepticism amongst the public whenever the government asks for anything. We want more of this or more of that, whatever. The data you had was great, but the thing that I always ask is compared to what, right? So you showed some really great data points. Do you have any data comparing, are these trends growing? Because it showed what happened in the last couple months. Is that different compared to last year and the year before and the year before? Raymond talks about crime stats, which is fantastic and it's scary, but where does Vacaville stack up? Are we a safer community than Are we safer than Fairfield? Are we safer than Solano? So a lot of the data we hear is compared to what? So when I go to the grocery store and someone's like, wow, gosh darn it, why'd you approve that? Sometimes I don't have that comparative data. So I know you probably don't have it off the top of your head, but in future presentations, for me at least, and probably for the public that's asking questions, compared to what? I mean, are we less safe than we were 2 years ago? Are we less safe than Solano County as an average, the state average? Some of those areas is where I have some questions, because we're getting to the point now with the budget that everything we add, we're going to have to take from somewhere else, and every department can use something. And I'm getting nervous because everyone has these needs. Granted, this is a vital need and our safety is the utmost importance, but again, compared to what? How bad is it really in Vacaville compared to other communities? So great presentation. I appreciate the time.
And I would just offer that, the national statistics that are used to determine what is your level of safety is, it's just that. There are numbers that sometimes will give you a relative feeling of what you're comparing it to. And so there is data that shows the ebb and flow of whether violent crime is up or down and what's the median. This is one of those scenarios where what we're seeing isn't necessarily in one data set that you're going to find. And so with the addition of new staff, and it's nice when there is new staff that comes on board when others retire, we had the benefit of hiring an FBI analyst. And when you hire somebody that has the skill set to really begin to look at data in a different set, and not the traditional FBI standard that's been around forever, which is going away in the next couple of years because it's so outdated in how it evaluates city safety, it looks like incident-based versus uniform-based. And I can tell you that there's other data that wasn't even before you tonight when it comes to how the organized retail theft it has increased and the numbers around those. But what we're finding through the analysis in the last 90, 120 days is focusing on the types of crimes that are occurring that aren't captured by the UCR data. So I can't go back 5 and 10 years and say that. I can look at the experience of what we're seeing, and this is a single page pad. Every single one of these is a different incident where we're encountering criminals with guns, and it tells a story that a UCR data doesn't. Gun inside backpack, under the passenger side seat, under the passenger side seat, floorboard under the driver's seat, rear floorboard of the vehicle, under the passenger side seat, backpack inside the trunk, jacket pocket of the passenger. It just goes on, every one of these. And this is in the last 60 days. So what is happening is the behavior that's out there when our traditional response to crime with the uniforms and patrol, they're dispatched to calls for service. And so if they had available time, this is just what they're coming across. So the intentionality of a dedicated team is why it was so valuable in the past. And the sense that it could be somehow just put into the existing staff is unrealistic, especially with all the changes. That is why I tried to tell the story tonight in a very different way. But I do appreciate data is very important. Data-driven decisions are something that I know are very important to you all.
Would you say that the crime that you're talking about now, that you're mentioning now, is this different than last year or say the year before or the year before? Are you seeing an uptick? Would you say that the severity of the situation we're in today is worse than it was last year or 2 years ago or 3 years ago?
The information that I'm privileged to know through intelligence briefings at the state level, at the county level, is information that keeps me up at night. And it is a change. And the change is that over time, this whole discussion of the shift of how an army of organized criminal behavior is really unleashed on the citizens of the entire state. And so the only thing I can do is my part in trying to protect and safeguard the interest of this community, at the same time work with our neighbors to see if we can work together to really not only get a handle on it, but get ahead of it. There's a foothold here, but there's a stronghold in many of the communities nearby. I don't want to see that. Living here, I absolutely am before you tonight, knowing full well that there is a change, and the data that I see in front of me is the uptick is what we're seeing as an outcome, but below the surface, it's very troubling. That doesn't mean it's not a safe city, but we have to address this very critically and strategically.
Councilmember Mashburn.
All right, so I'm going to support this tonight. I'm sure everybody's shocked by that. But let me explain to everybody the whys of it. And you were right, Vice Mayor. There was a point in time, 25 years ago, there was a gang task force. I was on it. And it was a collective of the street enforcement teams from the various cities. And those individuals were dedicated and committed to eradication of gang crime, organized crime, and gun violence in our county. And that has morphed over time and become a much more militarized and organized structure, so that everybody understands. When we talk about gangs now in California, we're not talking about the switchblade in the back alley. These are a very militarized organization. When the chief talked about the prisons having generals and captains and sergeants at arms and all those things, they do have those. They call their members soldiers for a reason. And they are behaving much more like a military organization. They literally have rules within their gang and bylaws, and those rules state that when they're going out to commit a crime, at least one individual will be armed, one individual will be watching. You need, from an enforcement perspective, to have a level of hypervigilance when dealing with those folks that requires a greater level of training. But you also need a level of hyper-focus to be able to make an enforcement with those folks. So you need to be able to understand how those different crimes that you might think were just a petty theft fit in with money laundering and also fit in with human trafficking, and how the gang is using all three of those together in concert to commit crimes and to make money. And you have to be able to put that investigation together appropriately in order to get a prosecution that sticks, instead of just having to write them a ticket for stealing some stuff at the factory stores and maybe having a gun in their car. You need to be able to pursue a RICO act against those individuals that's more of an organized crime act and a federal offense, so that they can go to prison instead of the county jail for a week. You need to be able to look at creating the right database to be able to show that there's gang affiliation, so you can get a gang enhancement on a gun crime, and that individual will actually go to prison instead of the county jail and be cycled back into our community. One of the other things that we have to watch for as a community, and that this task force will be able to help us with, remember we talked about how, or the chief talked about how the prison changed its structure for where it housed and how it housed inmates. When they did that and they pushed those generals back down into regular population, some of those people who were in the command structure of those gangs were moved into a prison in Vacaville. Because of proximity, their command structure moved with them. And so in our neighborhoods today, in all probability, there are people living who are associates or affiliates or have things, have involvement with those individuals. And when they get out of prison, they're not leaving our neighborhoods. They're moving into those homes. And it's not necessarily in the worst neighborhood in Vacaville. It could be in some of the good neighborhoods in Vacaville too. They make a lot of money in those criminal organizations. And so when we say, if you see it, say it, you absolutely need to do that. But we need to have those officers with that level of understanding and with that level of hypervigilance to be able to track that in our community and to be able to make active enforcement and inform the other officers who are doing the day-to-day operation of what's going on. They only see little pieces of it as they deal with those one-off calls. These folks track it and they see the patterns. They know what's going on, and they help keep our other officers safe. They help keep our communities safer. So that's one of the biggest reasons that I'm going to support this tonight, is because I know the level of training and the level of focus that's going to be required, and you have to have dedicated staff for that. And they're going to be people who are going to have to stay in that position. This is not something you can rotate in and out of every year or two and be effective. The learning curve to understand the gangs, because they are so extensive and because they're familial and they're generational, you have to have time to be immersed in that to understand it and to be able to track it. So
well said.
I appreciate it.
The only thing I can just add to that is there's a briefing that I was given this week by someone that when I was 30 years younger, I was arresting, and very much in our radar today. It doesn't go away. The behavior for those who are not trying to seek rehabilitation only get more emboldened. And I heard a comment from the earlier statement during business from the floor. We did make a really good arrest on Buck, and we interrupted a residential burglary where they were trying to steal guns. And it was just a couple weeks before that the same people we arrested for guns. The revolving door is real. The 6-month go back to prison or incarceration is at best 10 days and probably nothing anymore. I don't make those rules, but what I can do is put every effort and resource I possibly can so that they won't do it here, and it won't be lucrative to do it here because they won't like what they experience.
Thank you, Chief. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just to address the issue about safety, because I can tell you, based on my other job, statistically, that when we talk about the cities that are around us, in Solano County, we book just over 16,000 people a year. We book a felony in Solano County, 1 felony every 54 minutes. So because we are on this corridor between two big metropolitan areas, we do get a significant amount of crime. Vacaville books, I believe, just over 3,000 bookings a year. Fairfield now books more, or at last count, booked more than anybody else at over 6,000 bookings per year. Vallejo is right behind them, somewhere around 4, and then Dixon and Rio Vista and Benicia and some of our smaller cities fill everything in. Plus CHP, there's 19 agencies that book in our county altogether, including Fish and Game and everybody else. But the biggest are Fairfield, Vallejo, and then Vacaville. And so while we haven't risen to a level of some of our neighbors, we need to take steps now to assure that we don't. So I hope that answered everybody's question. We're safe. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to the floor.
Good evening. Good evening again, folks. Thank you, Chief Carley, for a very well-done presentation. I know that each time I get up here, I usually am talking about not spending money or trying to find different ways to spend money and save money. But I wanted to let you know that in this case, I wholly support the chief in the establishment of this gang task force and trying to do everything we can to make this city safer. I also wanted to point out that we spent about triple the amount of time spending $500,000 here, which I'm sure the council is going to approve, than we did spending over $1 million just a few minutes ago. I think every dollar warrants questioning and wondering how and why we get there. But I just wanted to point that out. Thank you for your time. I do support allowing the chief to hire 2 more officers and a lieutenant. And that's money well spent, very well spent, for the safety of all the city employees who got their raise, because they could be victims of crime also. As a matter of fact, at 4 o'clock this afternoon, I was accosted at the Texaco gas station here in town by some gang members who wanted money from me. I did make the phone call to the police department. Dispatcher was very helpful. There was an officer on the scene rather rapidly. There was no contact between me and the officer, nor the gang members and the officer, because they got in their car and left. But and I appreciate that kind of service from Vacaville PD. So thank you once again for the time, and thank you for supporting Chief Carley.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a couple questions. And this is more of a budget question. So in this particular case, you have to dip into the reserves. And I was wondering, is there a policy under what circumstances where you can go over budget and dip into the reserves? So does it have to be an emergency? I mean, I noticed that, and it sounds like there really is a sense of urgency on this, but the staff report was written with a sense of urgency and that needing rapid response. And I thought, oh, was there some trying to meet a policy where it has to be emergency to dip in the reserves? So that's one question. And number 2, Mayor Rowlett, you mentioned one of my favorite subjects, which is the Melrose, the CFD, and I live in Southtown, and I pay CFD 11. We pay a little over $2,000 per home. I don't mind paying that for police and fire services, but I think it's important to remember what the Melrose represents. The Melrose district is a specific territory. There's specific homes subject to that. So most of the city doesn't pay a Melrose, okay, and they're getting police and fire services. So what the Melrose is supposed to represent is we are supposed to pay the marginal cost of receiving police and fire services, and that is the marginal cost is the added cost of providing that service to each additional new home unit. Hopefully that makes sense. So what I'm hearing is this is a very specific gang task force, and if that task force, if the gang activity, say, isn't happening in Southtown, then arguably the Melrose is designed to pay services that are provided to that territory only. Does that make sense? So something to keep in mind. I did hear it goes to the general fund, but it really does need to be for services provided to that CFD territory. So my question to you is, where is the gang-related activity occurring within the city? Can you pinpoint, since this has been happening since July, I'm assuming you know kind of where are the areas where the gang activity has occurred? Thank you.
Thank you. And just for clarification, Southtown's not the only one that pays CFD. There's that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Mayor, if I could.
City manager.
First item related to reserves. The general fund reserves of the city are at the discretion of the council. When a majority of the council can choose to spend. Council did adopt a fund reserve policy So that is a yardstick, but again, that was a council adopted policy. So ultimately, the council has ultimate authority when it comes to reserve on the how and why that it's spent.
Perfect, thank you. Seeing no other, I'll close items from the floor. I'll entertain motion.
By simple motion, adopt the subject resolution.
I got a motion second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you, Chief. Item 10A, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Report to City Manager this evening. Just a quick reminder that we'll be holding Planning Commission next week in this facility. Also on the 22nd, we will have the next council meeting. But we wanted to take the predominant time of the City Manager's time tonight to get a briefing from Chris Concepcion, our Fire Chief, related to the planned power shutdown by PG&E. I can tell you that staff has filled a great deal of time today across all departments. It's amazing when you start talking about power shutoffs. One of the most impacted people in the room is Carrie Walker, our Parks and Recreation Director. We have kiddos showing up for preschool. We have programming all over the city, which all gets impacted. So from that to how the traffic lights are going to operate, all your staff have been extremely busy today. Even to the standpoint of programming AM 530 as a information alternative to folks if the power's out for consecutive days. So a lot of staff have spent a great deal of time today getting prepared. Chris is going to give you an update on what we've learned from PG&E this evening.
Chief.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I wish I had better news for you, but I don't. And I wish I had more concise information for you, but again, I don't. So as most people already know, as a result of trying to prevent another fire to the magnitude of like the ones we had in Sonoma County in 2017 and the Camp Fire last year in 2018, PG&E is implementing something called the Public Safety Power Shutdown, or the PSPS. And so what they are doing is anytime there is any kind of critical fire weather in the area, they're going to shut down power to prevent any of those kind of fires from happening. And so we are forecasted to experience that kind of critical fire weather here in Vacaville and Solano County, starting late tonight and through Thursday afternoon. We're supposed to have winds in the area of 15 to 25 miles an hour, north to northeast winds, meaning they're coming out of the north and coming out of the northeast. Steady at 15 to 25 miles an hour, so that's pretty critical. And then we're supposed to have gusts in the area of 30 to 40 miles an hour. So that's the reason why they're shutting down power, or PG&E is shutting down power. So what they have told us is that we are in phase 1, which includes an 8-county area in our surrounding area, and we're in the north part of that. So we're in phase 1, and that power shutdown is supposed to begin at midnight tonight. And that shutdown in that phase 1, which we are included in, starts at midnight tonight and goes for 12 hours. It takes them 12 hours to switch everything off in that area. So the residents in Vacaville can expect to lose power anytime between, and this is where I wish I had more concise information, but we just don't. We can expect to lose power anywhere from midnight tonight to sometime to around noon tomorrow. And then that power is supposed to be off through the weather event, meaning that they'll probably keep the power off until Thursday afternoon sometime. Now, PG&E says that they're supposed to turn the power on to the populated areas first. We're supposed to get, we're considered a populated area. We're supposed to get priority, but we don't know what that priority means. But residents need to expect that before the power gets turned back on, PG&E has to inspect all the power lines first before they can run power through there. And then it's a phased in turn on of the power. So expect about a 36-hour time frame where power is going to be off through the weather event, and then anywhere between near immediate getting the power back on to up to about 3 days. So this public safety power shutdown could last up to 5 days. And that's, again, I don't have any more concise information than that, other than it can last anywhere from 36 hours to up to 5 days. Yes.
Vice Mayor Harris.
So, question for you. You know, we do have seniors, elderly, disabled who have medical equipment in their homes. We have assisted living facilities. I know hospitals are exempt, but what happens with our, you know, disabled population, those who rely on, you know, medical equipment on a daily basis? Are there carve-outs for them, or how is that being handled?
No, there aren't any unfortunately, PG&E has tried to identify those folks and have been trying to work with them directly to try to make sure that they have continual backup power. But they have not shared specifically what what they're specifically doing for them. So we stand at the ready as far as the fire department, knowing that we're probably going to have an increase in the number of calls for emergencies to those people. So we are, as a result, we're going to upstaff both for the critical fire weather as well as for the anticipated increase in those kind of calls. We're upstaffing on the fire department for that.
So do you know how PG&E identifies those who are medically fragile and those who need them?
From what I understand, and I don't have all of the details on it, from what I understand, it was a voluntary type of thing where they're supposed to report that. And I don't know, and I can't speak for, and I don't want to speculate, so I can't speak for PG&E. I don't know if they have a complete list. I asked that question of the public health and the EMS section of the county this morning, and they didn't have the answer to that. I asked that very question.
Well, that's very concerning to me, especially when we don't have specific information on how long that shutdown could be and how many people it could literally affect their lives.
I completely agree with you. Like I said, I wish I had better information. It's just the information that's coming from PG&E, although they're having regular conference calls, and we're on every single one of those conference calls, there just isn't a lot of information that's coming out from them.
Well,
And Vice Mayor Harris, I don't want to speak for PG&E by any means, but my son has special needs. We hang out with many special needs families. A lot of those special needs families that rely on power have an agreement with PG&E through their PG&E bill, and they're marked medical now. I'm not saying that everyone goes through that, but most of the folks and families that I know of, they work through PG&E and they're marked medical. So I'm assuming PG&E knows those marked medical. They're going out to those homes. I can't tell you that everybody is, but I know that's one way that they can reach out to those folks.
Well, if it's up-to-date information.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, there's people who are medically fragile that happens every single day that they weren't yesterday.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Chief.
So
we'll continue to keep people
Yeah,
updated.
I've just got a couple more pieces of information.
Sure, absolutely. I
Got
apologize.
the map that's projected right now. That tan area is supposed to be affected. So really, essentially, the majority of the 95688 zip code and parts of the 87 are affected. Again, I don't have the duration of the shutdown. PG&E is opening at Mission Church, located at 6391 Leisure Town Road. Starting tomorrow from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. What they're calling a customer service center. That is for people to get in out of the heat, although the temperature is not supposed to get to critical levels. They'll have water there also, and then charging stations for cell phones and such. The other thing that I wanted to say is we're going to have to, because we don't know the duration of these shutdowns, and we don't know how long the technology requires power, so we don't know how long we're going to be able to get information out on social media and through the internet. We're going to have to go low tech, and so like Mr. City Manager was talking about earlier, we've been setting up today to make sure that, and we want all the Vacaville residents to, if we get this power safety, we get the shutdown, and during the shutdown, go low tech, tune in to AM 530, and we're going to be pushing out our notifications and information that way, as well as still through social media. And then the other thing too is I want to make sure, while people still do have access to the internet, this is a really good time. While I was sitting in the council meeting, I got numerous notifications from Alert Solano. So please go to alertsolano.com, sign up. They can notify you through your cell phone, through your email, through your landline and all that kind of stuff as far as ongoing notifications for the latest information.
Councilmember Sullivan?
Do we have active OES updates through 211? Can residents call 211 to find different resources, generators, or kind of, what do you recommend residents call if they have random questions surrounding the power outage? Anything ranging from batteries to non-emergency emergency services?
You can call OES, or you can call our information line. We'll try to answer to the best of our ability.
What would that number be, just so if anyone's watching they can?
So the general fire department number is 449-5452.
Thank you.
Make sure I give the general number and not my office number.
Thank you, Chief. We'll move on to item 11, reports to City Council. Anybody? Can you zoom on that?
Hit the plus button there.
It's basically everything from Peabody Road on the 8-7 side to the freeway, and then 8-8.
Can you bring that down a little bit, Michelle? There you go. Is that
Alicia, it's not open for public comment, but if you want to speak with him right after the meeting, we're almost there. We're one item away from close. Why don't you jump up?
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. It's my understanding you need power to also provide water. And will there be sufficient power to provide water? I'm just worried about water disruption.
Great question, thank you.
We've worked with our water operations staff, and I've taken what I believe is a conservative approach to our different sources of supply. Our expectation is that we will be able to continue to provide water based on the information we have now as far as the facilities and the power to them. But that being said, we still ask our residents to conserve and use a minimum amount, because if it goes a long time and for some reason some of our facilities do become affected, then we can. But our expectation is we'll be able to continue to provide water.
Thank you, sir. Okay, item 11, reports to City Council. Councilmember Sullivan?
Three quick ones. I know everyone's ready to get out of here. So the first one, at the last homeless roundtable, there was a very large and robust discussion about temporary winter homeless shelter for folks. Because of the tiny shelters and some other projects, there isn't a place for any of our neighbors that are outside. Do we have any traction on that, Jeremy, or was there? I know some folks have been emailing different council members. Are we moving on that at all, or is that not moving? Or
internally, staff has been reviewing any possibilities. The challenge is we have a 3% vacancy rate in our commercial district.
Gotcha.
So there's just not a lot of property available at this point, but we're continuing to look.
Okay. Do we have a plan B if we don't find anything, or do folks just sleep outside?
We don't have a plan at this point.
And then, is there any more action on the tiny shelters on Brown Street? I know some fencing went up. Can you share maybe what you know with residents who are still pretty worried about what might be happening?
Discussions with the county, they were installing a fence that was part of Plan of any development they would do on the site.
Okay.
But as far as I know, that there's no action to move forward with the tiny shelter project.
Okay. And then the last question, I may have missed this earlier, but I had in my notes somewhere that we were going to talk about the Unfunded Liability Advisory Group on the 8th. Was that today, or do you have updates on next steps for that, or when should residents expect to hear more on that?